Cowboy Carter, Act 2 of what appears to be a trilogy from the famous, worldwide, extraordinaire Beyonce. Renaissance was what kicked off this three-part album run where we seem to believe that's what's going to happen. It was the first album in so many years after Lemonade. Lemonade was a pretty game-changing moment for Beyonce, I would say. It was the one album that kind of took her to a totally new level. The emotions were high, the drama was real, but she took a long break and then she came back with Renaissance, and now we're getting Cowboy Carter as well. Who knows what the third one's going to be? We still don't know. You should be aware of the fact that Renaissance was the house dance extravaganza, which saw Beyonce take on a totally new genre and life of music in a really, really impressive way. It was one of my favourite albums of 2022. It still to this day is up there as well. I think it's aging really, really well. It's really fun, it's super replayable, and of course this entire trilogy that I think we're going to get is just exciting based on that album, because it was just like, holy moly, this could be her best album yet. And the theme of this one is kind of country music. That's how she set it all up. That's how she marketed the album. Of course, the album cover is exactly looking like that. The tracks that were the main singles are, of course, very much oriented towards country music. But now we've got the album. She did say herself it's a Beyonce album, not a country album. But, you know, you can tell the PR was very clever around this album, and it made everyone kind of think she's bringing country back, even though country didn't go anywhere, and one of the biggest songs of last year was a country song. But still, you know how these publications and these advertisers like to spin things and create narratives. Now, one interesting narrative that is forming around this current phase that Beyonce is in is that she essentially is reclaiming the genres of music that were once black genres but now have essentially become white genres because of how people associate them and how they were popularized and covered by white people over time, and everyone just suddenly kind of just, you know, became associated with it being more white people than it ever was black people, really, which is a shame, but is just the way history has ended up rewriting how people perceive these genres. Now, is this narrative something that we're projecting onto Beyonce, or is it something that she's actively seeking out to do? Because at the moment, it's certainly looking that way. I mean, House, of course, did stem, you know, Chicago from the, I think, 80s era, late 70s, 80s, of course. Frankie Knuckles being a big part of that. It was a black genre that ended up becoming more of a white genre. And then country, exactly the same. Started out in a much more, I guess, traditional sense, but has changed over years. And in the 2010s, it became like pro-country, and there's been all kinds of iterations of it. But originally was black people that created the genre, which history unfortunately forgets. But is Beyonce attempting to do that and make a statement with these albums? So far it looks like it could be that way, because she has literally picked two genres that started out that way and are now very much associated with white people, more so than anything else. So interesting. Depends what the third one's going to be, but I think once we find that out, we'll certainly know that this is her intention. But because she's so quiet, because she's so mysterious and doesn't talk about her music very much in interviews, it's very hard to say. But I respect that about Beyonce. She doesn't speak much, and when she does speak, it's pretty impactful. She just won that award the other night. She thanked all the musicians that have had such an impact on her. It was a very nice speech. It's always great to see musicians respect the influences that came before them, and you know, they wouldn't be who they are without them. And I like that Beyonce does speak very little, but when she does, it's pretty important. As for the album itself, well, now that we've actually got it, I think it was pretty led us to believe it was going to be a full-on country album. Not quite that now that we've got it, but still, regardless, it's very much Beyonce doing her own thing and having country as the backdrop. I mean, there certainly are some very heavy-handed country songs and some very heavy-handed lyrics that very much feel rooted in the stereotypes of the genre. She even says on the opening track, American Requiem, where she at one point was told she was too country, but then simultaneously she gets told that she's not country enough. So the song just feels like a call to arms in a sense, to her kind of announcing herself on this stage and being like, no, I came from Texas, this is actually my roots, and this is what I'm going to show you all for this album, for 27 tracks nevertheless. And does it need to be that long? Personally, I would say no, but I think you get a lot of great music in the midst of the track list for sure. Protector and Daughter. I have to mention these two in the same sentence, I would say, because they're both incredibly beautiful tracks that feel very personal, but also feel very traditional in the country sounds. You know, the guitar is very raw, it's very authentic sounding, it all feels very smoky and just traditional in how it is presented, and she kills it, honestly. Like, she does do really well over these types of instrumentals, and it's so impressive to me that Beyonce is so famous and is quite literally in like the top 10 artists in the world, undisputably. Like, so many people know her, so many people could sing so many of her songs, she's ridiculously famous, and yet that has never held her back from being so daring, because Lemonade itself was a daring album. There is country on that album itself. Daddy's Lessons is a country song, and yet so many other mainstream artists who are in the same conversation as Beyonce would never dare to step out their comfort zone and would never dare to drop an entire album that is just shifting the boundaries of what they've done and what everyone knows them for. Could you imagine, really, Drake doing something like this, or even an Ariana, to be honest, or a Taylor Swift? I personally don't think they'd ever dare themselves to go these lengths to rewrite themselves and reinvent themselves in the way that Beyonce does. And that is why, to me, she is so interesting and so intriguing and enjoyable as well. It's always fun to know that you're going to get something different. She pulls it off too. I mean, it's all good saying all these things, but if you make a crappy album, then what does it even matter? But she pulls it off. I mean, Texas Hold'em, yeah, it's a bit hokey, a bit pastiche, but honestly, listening to this album more and more, in the track list, I did think it sounded a little bit better. It wasn't quite as cartoonish, because I think in isolation it just feels like somebody is making their own imitation of what they think a country song sounds like, but I still think it is that to a degree, but I appreciated it a little bit more within the track list. 16 Carriages is a track that I still really appreciate. Again, the way the instrumentation kind of crashes for that chorus and kind of comes in and out sounds great. Two Most Wanted with Miley Cyrus. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Miley. I've spoken about her a lot on this channel, and it's never been too positive, to be honest with you. But every now and then I do think she comes through, and she probably elevated her game because she knew she was on an album like this. And of course her roots are indebted to country as well, and her voice worked really nicely. Really stunning track. The musical backdrop is really, really elegant sounding, and it's just one of the most beautifully produced songs on the entire album. Two Hands to Heaven, could say the exact same thing for that track too. Super stylish, really like the way it kind of enters a totally different passage towards the end, but again, Beyonce really always sells these things with her vocals, and yeah, it's just an all-round really good track. But I've got to mention the best track on the album for me personally, Bodyguard, man. Oh my god, this track is ridiculously catchy. The vocals are silky as hell. The bass little rumble is so good. It has a really nice bounce to it. The guitar has a really nice slinkiness to it too. It sounds like something you'd get maybe from the 2000s, but honestly, it's just such a good song. And this is where I think where she was telling people that this is a Beyonce album more than anything else, because you can still feel that kind of country aura in this track. It is breathing there and living in this track, but it's not like, you know, straight up, you know, friggin', I don't know, Willie Nelson country music. Like, it's not quite like that. It just feels like Beyonce doing her own take on it and just killing it as well. You've got the two covers on this album. You've got Jolene, which she does her own spin on, which I find to be a little funny, to be honest with you, because of the lyrics where she's like, I can easily understand why you're attracted to my man. And to me, it's just a bit like, look, Jay-Z, I mean, I'm a heterosexual man, okay? Like, maybe I'm the wrong guy to be asking, but Jay-Z, 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 yeah. I'm sure all the girls are queuing up. I'm sure they're queuing up to be with that man. Yeah, that guy, the guy that looks like that. Regardless, though, the cover itself is fine. She doesn't really do anything new to it. To be honest with you, this track for me, similar to Texas Hold'em, where it just feels like an outsider's perception of country music. Like most people, particularly in the UK, country music is never booming here. Like you barely see it enter the charts, right? And I think most people who don't pay attention to country music would just be able to go, oh yeah, Jolene, I know that song, that's a country song, and then maybe not mention many others. And I just do feel like that's where she was going with this. She just wanted something recognisable that the masses could consume, and everyone would just go, we all know that song. But she does, interestingly, cover Blackbird, which was definitely unexpected. And I want to say as well how pretty bold it is to cover such an iconic Beatles song and have it track 2 on your album. I mean, that is bold. Now, something I'm not really seeing many people say is how significant it would be that a black woman would cover this song, because I don't think people are fully familiar that the song itself is like a dedication to the civil rights movement. So I think Beyonce has obviously picked this song on purpose, despite the fact that it's not technically a country song, but it is an acoustic track. And it's a solid rendition. I mean, the sort of diva backing vocals that are a little over the top do kind of cut through the atmosphere ever so slightly, and it was never going to be the original. I just don't think anyone can quite make their own version of this track and top what the Beatles did. It's just one of those songs. I just don't think you can quite capture that atmosphere in the same way. Although, shout out to Anderson .Paak, I think he got pretty close. His version of this track is amazing. But yeah, I appreciate Beyonce doing this, and like I say, I think it's important that she did cover this song. But as for the actual quality of it, it's just alright. Then you've just got tracks that are total deviations from any kind of genres at all, and they just defy what the hell you could even label them as. I mean, Spaghetti as well has a bit more of a hip-hop influence to it. Just absolutely batshit and bonkers, and some of the lyrics are ridiculous. And then Shaboozey comes on the track and just has a bit of his own, like, pretty impressively vocally performed outro. It's just an absolute mess of a song, to be honest, and it doesn't really fit the vibe of the album. But then you've also got Ya, which also doesn't really fit the vibe. But good God, this is a rootin' tootin' anthem, man. This is just an absolute off-the-wall, bonkers track that has so much going for it. It's really lively, it's exciting, it's energetic, and has a Beach Boys interpolation too, which I think is pretty odd but cool. Riverdance, I mean, can I call it erotic country? Could this be called erotic country with like a dance twist? Like, what is this song? It's just her talking about bouncing quite a lot. And yeah, again, it has that kind of country twang to it, but it feels more of like a dance fusion of that. Tyrant isn't, too far away from that. This actually does have Dolly Parton on it. And yeah, just has some really stereotypical motifs with the lyrics where she keeps saying ride it, but you know what she really means, but of course, cowboys. And then she says giddy up a few times as well. And it's a little silly with the lyrics. She's having fun with it though. It's not like a bad song. It's just a bit like, by this point of the album, I just feel like she's completely ditched what was going on in the first half of the album in terms of like the overall sound, that she's just kind of going a bit all out there and just being loose and having fun. I'm all for it. I do think there's just maybe a few too many like shorter interlude tracks that are like 1 minute long that don't really commit to memory, especially when you're listening to an album from front to back for so long, like it's an hour and 20 minutes. I just think some of those tracks just come and go and don't really have much of an impact. And yeah, I mean, like I say, some of those tracks towards the end that are going a bit more over the top are fun, but I think she kind of sacrifices, I don't know what she sacrifices, because it's weird, because the lyrically Renaissance was a little bit like this as well, where it was quite in your face, again, quite erotic, doesn't really hold back. But it worked for what she was going for in terms of the sound of the album, whereas I think some of these tracks, the sound and her lyrics and her sort of silliness kind of kind of collides together a little bit. But in terms of variety and diversity and darting around and constantly shifting and constantly giving you something different, this album does a good job of that, because it probably needed to, in order to maintain people's attention for the runtime. I mean, like I say, you know, you are getting country on this album, but it's not strictly that. And I think if you were getting that for an hour and 20 minutes, actually this album might have suffered. So props to Beyonce for giving us a variety and an album that is pretty messy and pretty all over the place, because it needed that for the length. Is it something that I absolutely love from start to end, front to back, the entire thing? Personally, no. I think for me, I'll end up going to individual tracks a lot more than I will playing through this album from start to end. But this run that she's on is really strong. I mean, Renaissance was fantastic. This is really good too. Before that, we had Lemonade, which again, you could argue is her best album yet. You could easily say that. Like, these last 4 albums, including Beyonce self-titled, I think are a cut above the first 4 albums of her discography. And those first 4 aren't bad, by the way. I just think she's more daring now and more willing to challenge herself to try new things, and she's pulling it off. Like, yeah, this album isn't necessarily perfect from start to end, but she definitely nailed the criteria, and there's so many good songs on it. So for me, a 7 out of 10, and I am just in awe of Beyonce's willingness to dare and try new things and challenge the listener as well, because there will be people out there that don't necessarily care about country music, but because this is Beyonce, they will listen to it, and you're getting a good album as well. So what you should do is check out more country albums, because there's a lot of good ones out there, and also check out more of my videos as well. Subscribe, let me know your thoughts on this album. What's your favourite track? It's got to be Bodyguard for me. Yeah, check out my Patreon as well. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Have a good day. Sorry for my throat, I've still got a bit of a cold. And have a good day. Goodbye.